Mr. President, I too rise this morning, or I guess almost afternoon, to talk about the Energy Policy Modernization Act of 2016. And yes, sometimes you can be cynical about this place and what you can get done, and then all of a sudden you have a great opportunity to move something forward. And the senator from Alaska said it correctly. This is a milestone for the Senate. And the fact that we are considering energy policy legislation on the Senate floor in a bipartisan bill, or any bill, for the first time since 2007. So a tremendous milestone, and I thank her for her leadership and for her time and efforts to put this legislation together in such a bipartisan fashion, to show the kind of process that we went through with that chart, hearings, listening sessions, discussions, amendments. I think it's appropriate at this time to thank our staffs. Usually that's done at the end of a process, but when you've had a bill on the floor for the first time since 2007, you should herald them in advance. So Angela Becker-Dittman and Colin Hayes, and I know Karen has also played a big role in this, and so I thank them. But my colleague is a partner, as she said, in all things energy, and it's interesting that the other senator from Alaska is presiding at this moment, because we have all been working, but the senator from Alaska, Murkowski, and I participated in an Arctic summit just last week in Seattle, focusing on another policy for our nation and the urgency of getting a ice-breaking fleet for the United States of America, and what we need to do in the Arctic. So I have certainly enjoyed the many, many efforts that we in the Pacific Northwest region focus on, and I think maybe that helped us a little bit in our outlooks. It's not that we agree on everything, certainly we don't, but I think that we know where we disagree, and we try not to let that get us held up. We try to find the commonality in what we are doing in moving forward on a modernization of our energy system, and make sure that we are empowering the private sector to continue to move ahead on the things by making sure that either the R&D investment or changes in policy or looking at a workforce or something as important but as basic as investments in cybersecurity get done on our watch. And that's really what the 2006 Modernization Act is about. So I thank the chair for her leadership on that effort and for steering us to this process that we have before us today. And as she said, it's not a perfect bill that we're not going to hear from our colleagues on. I'm sure, since it is the first major piece of energy legislation that we hope goes all the way to the president's desk, that it is a process that I'm sure many of our colleagues are going to want to see amendments on, and we will work through them to the best of our abilities and to hopefully improve the bill, but also not sink the bill with poison pill amendments that we know either will get it vetoed or won't get across the finish line where we need to take this legislation. So I'm here this morning to, along with the chair of the committee, thank our colleagues on the committee for their leadership and input on this bill on both sides of the aisle. It, again, was a process in which not everybody agreed, but a bill passed out of committee with well over the majority of votes in the committee in a bipartisan way, and I think that signals that it should have good support here on the Senate floor, because we went through a very deliberative process in the committee, and that deliberative process means a lot of issues were aired, and we kind of know where we can go and where we can't go on this legislation. Again, it doesn't mean we're not willing to consider a lot of debate. We are. Or it doesn't mean that people aren't going to offer amendments that are going to be challenging. They are. But in the end, I think if we want to keep moving forward with empowering the kind of energy revolution that we're seeing, we need to keep up on our side of the ledger here in the nation's capital. So much has changed in the last 9 years since that 2007 Act. And before that, we had a small bill in 2005. And so we've seen some very dramatic changes in energy. Clean energy has certainly weathered the storm and is not just a pipe dream anymore. It's a key driver of our economy, and it's helping us reduce our carbon emissions. Wind power has more than tripled since the last bill, solar voltaic installations are up nearly 15%. The number of LED lights, I'm glad the senator from Alaska's husband is such a cheerleader, but that is exactly what we're talking about. It has grown more than 90 times its level in the last 15 years in the last time period since that bill. And the reason is, just as the senator from Alaska said, this is all about consumers who at the bottom line want to be able to save money on their energy costs. And you bet senators from Alaska get that. I will say senators from Washington get that as well. We get it in a different way. You get it because you are constantly battling the highest energy costs in the nation, and we get it because we are constantly reaping the benefits from some of the lowest energy costs in the nation. So we both have a great deal of concern here. We both want to protect the industries and the economic opportunities of our economy, and we know that energy is the lifeblood of any economy. The U.S. solar industry employed more than 200,000 Americans in 2015, and that was a 20% growth in the industry in the last year. And to put it into perspective, it is nearly growing 12 times faster than the national employment rate during that same time period. So we need to continue this effort to make investments in the right research and development, the right technologies, and empower homeowners, ratepayers, and even businesses to get billions of dollars in savings. So why are we doing this bill? Well, as I said, it is an important journey to update our antiquated energy policies that have been part of our challenge when we want to modernize our infrastructure, and we want to maintain our global competitiveness. These are issues that are part of our energy debate today because we also want to reduce carbon pollution, which, as my colleague said, while this may not have everything we want to see from our side of the aisle in a carbon reduction plan, it certainly shows that we do want to see investments in clean energy. So it doesn't matter whether you are a Republican or Democrat. The people of this country have said clearly they want to see clean energy, and they want us to help curb climate change. So we need to listen to our constituents, and that's why we're trying to move past some of the issues of policy and move forward on things that will empower our citizens. I see a new head of the Senate here who is from the state of Iowa, who understands exactly what I'm talking about, because you too, whether it is in wind or solar or biofuels, have seen the economic benefit of a changing energy policy for our economy and want to make sure that businesses and ratepayers are still empowered. So we're here because we need to update and modernize our energy policies. And that is what we did when this bill came out of committee with a 18-4 vote. And we need to build on the momentum of the technologies and how their deployment reflect new market realities. Now, this was a very important aspect of our energy debate. That is the Secretary of Energy's completion of what was called a Quadrennial energy review. What is our nation's energy challenges? It wasn't just an energy department, energy agency discussion. It was the entire federal government's weighing in on what are the energy needs of our nation. It's done every 4 years. And basically what Secretary Moniz said in that report is that we are at a crossroads, that dynamic and changing nature of our domestic resource mix and expanded supplies of natural gas, but also growth in distributed generation, is creating opportunities and challenges. And as the Secretary put it, quote, "The longevity and high capital cost of energy infrastructure means that decisions made today will strongly influence our energy mix for the considerable part of the 21st century," end quote. So what was he talking about? He was talking about the fact that this crossroads and where we make investments will mean that we will either reap the benefits of making the right decisions or stymie our economy's economic growth by not making the right energy decisions. So when we talk about energy infrastructure, I try to remind my colleagues we're talking about 2.6 million miles of pipeline, 640,000 miles of transmission lines, 414 natural gas storage facilities, 330 ports with petroleum and crude, and more than 140,000 miles of railroad and a diverse mix of energy projects, and obviously an electricity grid that runs from coast to coast. So the Quadrennial Review talked about how we needed to modernize and upgrade that infrastructure, and that the electricity grid was a key part of that. And that is why you will see a lot in this bill about modernizing the electricity grid and why it is so important to our nation. Again, from an economical perspective of having affordable, cheap, renewable, clean energy power, but also in making sure that it helps us with cybersecurity. Once again, a quote from the report says, "Dramatic changes in U.S. energy landscape have significant implications for infrastructure needs and choices. Well-informed, forward-looking decisions that lead to more robust, resilient infrastructure can enable a substantial new economic, consumer service, climate protection, and system reliability benefits," end quote. So that is why you will see a significant focus in this bill on infrastructure, investing in technologies, cybersecurity, making our grid more intelligent, efficient, and resilient, ways that we believe are going to help both businesses and consumers. The bill includes investments in energy storage, which helps integrate renewable energy. It has provisions for advanced grid technologies, which really help make our electricity grid smarter and more intelligent to move energy around more efficiently. It has cybersecurity research and development. I don't think there'll be anybody here in the Senate that won't support this more robust effort on cybersecurity, given the challenges and the threats we face. It has a focus on new renewable technologies, which are great breakthroughs in helping to drive down costs. It has energy efficiency, which cost is basically 1/3 to 1/2 less of new generation. This chart here, focusing on that, is the question of whether you want to pay 4.6 cents a kilowatt for production or 12 cents a kilowatt for production. Well, I know this, I'd rather pay 4.6. I would rather drive the efficiency down to the consumer, whether that's from renewable energy, as opposed to making investments in what we know is going to be more expensive energy for the future. When it comes to R&D, we need to make sure that we are making the right investments for the future, and that we are sending the signals that capital markets will take as also a signal for continued investment. And we need to make investments in our workforce, because as the Quadrennial Review report shows, that we will need 1.5 million new workers by 2030 in the energy sector. That is a huge number. And I will say, Madam President, that we do not have the right tools in place to quickly train as many people as necessary. I'm sure the presiding officer would attest to this just in the biofuels area. I'm sure that there are institutions in her state that are working hard to help describe and train and educate those in the biofuels area so that we can have a robust infrastructure, the science, the R&D, the distribution, all of that. I know in our state we're working hard on this with our national laboratories and Washington State University on getting an advanced biofuels for the airplane sector, because we want aviation to move forward on using those fuels and getting even more efficiency. And there is advanced manufacturing here, where it is about making sure that our trucks have the same efficiency opportunities that we were able to help usher through in 2007 with higher fuel efficiency standards for automobiles. Now we want to make sure we're investing in the same level of R&D for our advanced truck fleets in the United States so that they can reap the same benefits of being fuel-efficient automobiles. So, as I mentioned, the Quadrennial Review laid all of this out, and that is why we took an effort with the committee on hearings that my colleague already outlined, with more than 100 different energy bills and a variety of input from our colleagues. So, yes, energy efficiency is front and center in this debate. In fact, energy efficiency, there were, I think, 22 different energy efficiency bills from 30 different senators and co-sponsors in the discussion. I think in 2007, we definitely talked about some smart grid demonstration projects and a few things, but nowhere was energy efficiency or the development of these policies, whether it's storage or distributed generation or protecting ratepayers, none of them were as front and center as they have been in this debate today. And that's because energy efficiency just doesn't make sense for the environment. People have seen that it makes sense for the economy and it makes sense for our consumers. As I said, it drives down the cost of production, and obviously, when it integrates more sustainable resources, efficiency becomes a cheaper, better job creator and carries lower environmental costs than the alternative. So now, not only does it save consumers money, but it helps add to the flexibility of our grid and reduces carbon. So I want to thank a few of our colleagues who have worked so hard on helping us put this legislation together. My colleague from Alaska mentioned the Shaheen-Portman piece of legislation, which is a key cornerstone of this bill when it comes to the energy efficiency area. It encompasses much of their work, and they have obviously been stalwarts for years trying to get energy efficiency legislation moved through the United States Senate, and many of the provisions that they have sought in the past are now in this bill. So I want to commend them for their efforts. Obviously, residential and commercial buildings consume 40% of our United States energy. That's roughly $430 billion. So when you talk about focusing on making our buildings more efficient and attacking that sector of our energy needs, there are some true savings. In the past, energy buildings and equipment standards have lowered the cost, and they expected to save something like 3 billion metric tons of energy, and basically, which is equivalent of carbon emissions of 42 million vehicles. So just by focusing on our buildings, making them more energy efficient, we can have a tremendous impact. That is why I worked with my colleague, Senator Murkowski, in authoring a section of this bill on smart buildings. Senator Warren joined us. And smart buildings really will help us manage our energy loads better, particularly focusing on lighting, heating, cooling systems, and communications between buildings. And we heard from the Department of Energy that smart buildings really could be a game changer for the efficiency discussion. So I thank my colleague from Alaska for working with me on that provision. DOE has estimated that smart buildings can result in a 30% additional efficiency in the way buildings are operated when they realize the full potential of these technologies. So you can imagine if you're an industry and you're trying to be competitive, what that's going to mean to have that level of efficiency. I know because of every sector of my economy, they're constantly focusing on energy costs as a way to be competitive, particularly in an international market. And I would say that one of the reasons we have so many what is now server farms in Washington State, that is storage data facilities, is because we have cheap electricity. And so when you start saying you are going to drive down the cost of electricity by such a significant margin, people are saying, I want to locate there. So we want to make sure we are empowering free capital and investments to help us reduce carbon emissions by focusing on giving those powers to help focus on smart buildings. Now, this isn't just a U.S. strategy. This is something that the United States could be world leaders in. The International Energy Agency says that China alone is expected to use more than 1.5 trillion between now and 2035 when it comes to the energy efficiency market. If you think about it, they're building so rapidly, and yet they could be incented, that is, by the level of investment the United States is already making, to further their own efforts in smarter buildings, reducing carbon, building more efficiently. And this is something where U.S. solutions could aid. And I hope that we will, in the U.S. agreement with China, continue to focus on these kinds of innovations. So, my colleague mentioned infrastructure as a key theme of this bill and mentioned some of those provisions. As I mentioned, utilities and the fact that on average, the United States spends nearly 29% of its total expenditures on utilities such as electricity and natural gas. And so we want to continue to make improvements there. Data-driven intensive industries also, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, are part of the equation. And we know as they continue to grow, we're going to want to make continued investments. In the Pacific Northwest, the Bullitt Center, which has been an acclaimed building, really focusing on probably the greenest commercial building in the entire world, not only a net zero building, but showing just how well you can build today the most efficient building using no resource, no electricity resource, but putting actually back onto the grid. So we have many of these efforts in the Pacific Northwest as people have seen that smart building technology is expected to grow to $7 billion now to $17 billion in the next 4 years. So it is a tremendous, tremendous market opportunity for U.S. technology. I would like to just mention a couple of other provisions that our colleagues have worked on in the bill and thank them for that. I'd like to thank Senators Franken and Heinrich and King and Hirona for their efforts on energy storage that we've included in this legislation, and a program that is really focused on driving down the cost curve of ways to help with storing, whether you're talking about battery technology or large-scale storage. I also want to thank Senator Wyden and King and Hirono for their focus on advanced grid technologies. That includes demonstrating how multiple new technologies can be put into the electricity grid on a micro level. And this is so important. My colleague from Alaska and my colleague from Hawaii both see the challenges of very different energy mixes than the rest of the United States and the challenges with transportation. So helping them on microgrid issues is critically important. And as I mentioned, making distributed generation more reliable, more intelligent is a very key factor in this bill. Senators Wyden did incredible work on making sure that we added new renewables in the area of marine, hydrokinetic, and geothermal and biopower into this legislation, and I thank him for that. I know that my colleagues, Senator King and Sanders, and I know we'll be joined by Senator Reid on the floor, are continuing to push the envelope on innovative ways to make sure that solar and distributed generation work for our citizens. This is something we didn't get as much in the bill as we wanted. I mean, we certainly put some new authority to make sure that we are protecting consumers, but I think you'll probably see where people will want to go further to make sure that we are empowering what I call everybody from the Tea Party to the environmentalists who want to be in the solar business, put solar on their roof, or be in some other form of renewable energy, but don't want to be gouged for the cost of doing that by the utility. They want the utility to make the investment, and they want to get a return for them participating in reducing energy costs. I also want to thank all those who worked on the cybersecurity section of the bill. As I mentioned, very important. 2003, more than half of the cyber incidents were directed at critical energy infrastructure. Half of the cyber incidents. So the bill today basically says the Department of Energy will be the lead role in coordinating our cyber response for the energy sector, and that we will be working on the R&D in partnership with the private sector to make sure that we have the right kind of information sharing to continue to make the kinds of investments for resiliency that we need to have for cybersecurity. And lastly, I just want to mention a few things. The Advanced Vehicle Technologies Program, Senators Stabenow and Peters and Senator Alexander all worked on this section of the legislation to try to, as I mentioned earlier, drive the same fuel efficiency into advanced trucks as we have in automobiles. And this is something in my state where companies like PACCAR and
the Pacific Northwest laboratories are already trying to drive down the cost of truck transportation. Why? Because they see how much freight the United States is moving to overseas markets. We see that we have products that we're going to sell to a developing overseas world, but we have to move them cost effectively. So we've put a lot of work into making our truck transportation more efficient. And I thank Senator Warren for her work on the Energy Information Administration and Senator Manchin for his work on workforce issues, which I'm sure we're going to continue to hear about when we come to the floor as it relates to our mine workers and a variety of other people, of how we keep transitioning to training and making sure we have the workforce for tomorrow. And lastly, I just want to mention my colleague, Senator Heinrich, who has been very active on the workforce issues as well, and making sure that we have grants for workforce shortages and job training. So I think, Madam President, my colleague from Alaska said it best, that this is not a bill that is about what everybody wanted, but about what we could do that is important to move forward now. That it was built on a good bipartisan process. That means that people had their input, and we hope to follow the same process here on the floor. On this side of the aisle, I'm sure that my colleagues will want to talk about ways in which we would go further. The Energy Innovation Act that we introduced last September has many of these provisions. Things like having an energy efficiency resource standard at a national level, getting Senator Bennett and Isaacson's SAVE Act, which makes sure that consumers realize as homeowners the benefits of energy efficiency that they make investments in. I mentioned my colleagues, Senator Reid of Nevada and Senator King of Maine, who have innovative ways to make sure that consumers benefit from being in the solar business. And I'm sure that we will hear many, many more from people on both sides of the aisle on their ideas of how they would like to improve this bill. But as my colleague from Alaska said, it's important that we work together and not try to torpedo this bill, but move forward on what has been a good bipartisan process and continue to make investments for the future. One of the last things I want to mention as an investment for the future has been the success of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I'm so proud that the Land and Water Conservation Fund was an original legislation by my predecessor, Scoop Jackson, a senator that served our state many years. And the Land and Water Conservation Fund, I think, serves as one of the most successful conservation programs in our country's history. And it had been successful for more than 50 years before it was dismantled, and then in the omnibus we were able to reestablish it for the next 3 years. Obviously, our committee came to a bipartisan decision that it should be, we think, made permanent because it was such a successful program. At least it should receive the same attention that it did for the first 50 years and continue us on the same journey that we've been making to make sure that we have open space in the United States of America as we continue to grow. These are important outdoor spaces that have also generated an incredible outdoor economy for the United States of America. It has generated economic revenue by having the ability for people to go to the outdoors. So I hope that we will keep that as part of this legislation as it moves all the way through the United States Senate and through the House and to the President's desk, permanent reauthorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So, Madam President, at this time, I'm going to turn the floor back over to our colleagues who would like to discuss this bill or other things, but to say that this is about modernization of energy, the lifeblood of our economy, driving down the cost through investments on a new strategy for the future, not holding on to the past as much as moving forward to the future and enabling our businesses, our ratepayers, and all of those that we care about in that economy to continue to reap the benefits of next generation energy technology, renewable technology that's cleaner, more efficient, and will keep our economy in a driver's seat for our own U.S. economy and be a game changer for the ability for us on an international basis to provide solutions that are cleaner, more efficient for sure, and will help us deal with the carbon issues around the globe.
So with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.